What do you look for visually when identifying a domesticated animal? Domestication is a concept that can be defined in different ways, and no one can really agree on which animals should be considered as such. However, in nearly all cases, certain animals are universally agreed to be domesticated, and these species seem to have some specific attributes in common that have come to be referred to as the domestication phenotype, said to be derived from a process called domestication syndrome. The domestication phenotype involves the emergence of convergent traits among unrelated species that are readily observable that deviate from the so-called wild type. Such physical examples would be floppy ears in domesticates such as pigs, dogs, and rabbits. Another would be size reduction. You may have heard of this concept before. The famous Russian farm fox experiment involved selective breeding of the tamest red foxes to test whether or not these certain behavioral and physical characteristics would emerge as a result. One of the traits that reportedly occurred in the experiment among the tame foxes was modified or reduced pigmentation, a condition known as leucism, and one of its most prevalent forms, piebaldism. Piebaldism is a genetic condition where cells called melanocytes are absent in areas of the skin and hair, forming patchy areas of white in color, and sometimes eye color that coincides with skin color, for instance, blue eyes with pink skin. It has been hypothesized that this condition is related to changes in the development of the neural crest. Such white coloration often reduces a wild animal's fitness because of exposure to predators and prey. Therefore, it has become one of the quintessential marks of a domesticated animal, so to speak. It is the genetic trait responsible for the tuxedo markings on your cat, the beautiful patterns on painted horses, or the spots on Dalmatians. Many domesticated cattle breeds are well known for their blotchy patterns, and the trait occurs throughout animal populations recognized as domesticated, which is why it is often suggested that such changes mark the emergence of the domestication syndrome. Wilkins et al. Stated, pigmentation changes represent one of the first traits to appear during the domestication of foxes, mink, and rats selected for tameness. In the views of many scientists, piebaldism just seems to be a natural progression of the domestication process, possibly coinciding with artificial selection for tameness, and in many cases, humans intentionally breed animals for these beautiful markings from domesticated stock, sometimes even considering piebaldism to be a breed in the species or one in the making. So one would figure that piebaldism would be rare or non-existent in animals that we don't consider domesticated. Why, then, are leucism and piebaldism so prevalent in so-called wild captive animals? Furthermore, why is this not associated with domestication when it occurs in this species? The aforementioned farm fox study supposedly produced piebald foxes from genetic selection for tameness, but we have plenty of leucistic and piebald foxes in regular old fur farms here in the United States. Not to mention, we have all white or blotchy patterned hedgehogs, peacocks, alligators, coatis, iguanas, ball pythons, palm civets, sugar gliders, raccoons, raccoon dogs, tigers, lions, reindeer, wallabies, porcupines, skunks, and even clownfish. Not only are piebaldism, melanism, and other unique color variants showing up in different exotic pets, it doesn't even take that long for these patterns to emerge. For instance, in only a few generations, the American population of African pygmy dormice is now being sold with piebald markings. Of course, leucistic animals do occur naturally, although this recessive trait is rare or sporadic in wild conditions. There are, however, some exceptions. A phenomenon called island syndrome describes the effects of evolution in some isolated island populations that sometimes mirror the observed changes in domesticated animals. In addition to other changes such as reduced sexual dimorphism, reduced size, and lack of fear towards humans, leucism, melanism, and piebaldism are often expressed by these populations. These changes may reflect the effects of repeated founder events or population bottlenecks. In addition, many islands lack predators. In these cases, it is possible that the same mechanisms that led to increased docility in mainstream domesticated animals may explain the phenomenon of reduced hormonal fear response in island living species. Aside from islands, in one highly unusual case, leucistic deer became prevalent in a population confined to a military base by Seneca Lake in upstate New York. This deer population was protected from predation, and hunting them was eventually made illegal. In addition to this, the smaller size of this deer population led to inbreeding. Inbreeding, sometimes even referred to as line breeding, is a common practice in captive animals and is the method used to develop modern dog breeds. Such breeding practices are often done out of necessity with exotic animals due to the limited numbers of founders available, and are the reason we have white tigers and other color variants, morphs, or breeds of different animals. The island syndrome can effectively mirror the same selective pressures as captive animal populations. Unfortunately, some of the genetic mutations related to piebaldism may influence the occurrence of maladies such as deafness, developmental disorders of the eyes and night blindness, and osteoporosis. However, are they associated with behavioral traits such as tameness? In one study that examined the potential differences between different coat colors in various cat breeds, pied cats were found to have decreased stranger-directed aggression. An increase in piebaldness was seen in the foxes bred for reduced aggression and fearfulness during human interaction. However, one study found that morphological traits such as white pigmentation did not predict the strength of certain behaviors in dog breeds, and those researchers suggested that perhaps these traits could be artificially selected post-domestication improvement traits instead of inherent to domestication alone. Regardless, exotic pet populations that present leucism seem to be following the same trajectory of agreed-upon domesticated species, whether their markings were intentionally selected for or not. However, scientists who see these animals rarely describe them as domesticated. While it is almost universally accepted that the foxes in the Russian farm fox experiment are some level of domesticated, these and other traits in animals culturally designated as wild are often ignored. It's almost as if we latch on to the idea of an animal being non-domesticated, and just because these animals are not traditionally kept as pets, we refuse to acknowledge the similarities so-called exotic pets have with traditional pets. Even though it is questionable if docility or so-called domestication is inherent to animals expressing leucism or piebaldism, there is clearly some link that requires further study. If traits like leucism are found to not be a valid mark of a domesticated animal, what is? Does domestication even exist? Exotic pets mirror so-called domesticated animals in virtually every way. There is actually ample evidence that captive animals are not like their wild forms, despite claims to the contrary. Furthermore, there seems to be no sound explanation as to why some animals are considered domesticates while others are perceptively locked into a state of wildness.